so I'm going to make this baby cardigan. I'm using double knit yarn is what's on the label, and I'm using a 4.5mm hook, and I'm going to start off by making a slip knot and chaining 62. 3, 4, 61, 62. Into the third chain from the hook, so skip this one and into this one here, do 1 double crochet. And do 1 double crochet in every stitch to the end, and you will have 60 double crochets at the end of your first row. Just coming to the last few double crochet of the first round. And the last one. Chain 1 and turn your work. Okay, so between each round, we're going to do an in-between round. So before we get to round 2, we're going to do the little flowers. So how we do these is you're going to be working into the back loop only of your double crochet stitches. So slip stitch into the back loop of the first stitch, slip stitch into the back loop of the second stitch, leaving the front loops, and chain 3, slip stitch back into the same stitch, chain 5, slip stitch back into the same stitch, and chain 3, and slip stitch back into the same stitch. And you will have created your first flower. You are then going to slip stitch into the next 4 stitches. So 1 into the back loop only, 2, 3, and 4, and into the next one, 5, slip stitch, and repeat the pattern of this flower. So chain 3, slip stitch back into the same stitch, chain 5, slip stitch back into the same stitch, chain 3, slip stitch back into the same stitch, and then slip stitch along to the 5th, 5 along, so slip stitch in the back loop, and you're going to be using front and back loop for the rest of the project. 2, 3, 4, and 5, and repeat this the whole way along. So in every 5th stitch you're going to do one of these flowers and slip stitch in the back loops only, and I'll meet you at the end of this in-between round. So I've come to my last flower, and you should have 4 stitches left, so you're just going to slip stitch along those 4 stitches, 3 and 4 in the end, chain 1, and that's what your in-between row will look like. Okay, that's what your in-between row will look like. So we're on to row 2 now. Turn your work. So now we're going to be working into the front loops of this project. So into the first front loop, do 2 double crochet, and into the next stitch, 1 double crochet, into the next stitch, 2 double crochet, and in the next stitch, 1 double crochet. And you continue this all the way along until you come to the end. 2 double crochet in one stitch, 1 double crochet in the next stitch. I've come to the last stitch of the second row, and it should be 1 double crochet, chain 1, and turn your work. And now we're going to be doing the in-between row between 2 and 3. So what you're going to aim to do now is to put one of these flowers in between each of these flowers. So you can slip stitch along to the middle of these 2 flowers. The numbers don't have to be exact because there are 90 stitches, 12 flowers, so it's going to be 7.5. So you slip stitch into the first stitch and again into the front loop only, and I'm going to slip stitch right the way along to the middle of the first 2 flowers. Like that. And then I'm just going to chain 3, slip stitch into the same stitch, chain 5, slip stitch into the same stitch, chain 3, and slip stitch into the same stitch. And then I am going to continue along, slip stitching along the front loop of each stitch until I'm in between the next 2 flowers, and you continue this pattern right the way to the end, and then we will go on to row 3. So I'm just coming to the end of this in between round, and just one before the last slip stitch I'm going to do one last flower. So that's a chain 3, a slip stitch, a chain 5, and slip stitch all into the same stitch, and a chain 3, and slip stitch into the last stitch. Chain 1 and turn your work. Okay, so now we're working into the back loops of that round. So now you're going to do into the first slip stitch, if you can get in there, 2 double crochet into the first stitch, and then 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So 1 stitch, and that's my dog, 2 stitches, 2 double crochets in the next stitch, 1 and 2 into the same stitch, and 1 double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. And remember, it's the back loops only. So you continue this pattern of 2 double crochet into 1 stitch and 1 double crochet into the next 2 stitches, 1 stitch each, right to the end of the row, and then we will turn and we will do our next flower row. So I've come to the end of that row, my wool tangled up, and now we're going to do another in between row. So again, I'm going to aim to put the flowers in between each of the last row of flowers. So 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. So on average it's about every 10 slip stitches. So chain 1 and turn your work, and I'm going to do 1 in the second slip stitch to start. So do your flower, and again, as I repeated before, all into the front loop only. And 3. And then slip stitch about 10 ahead until you get in between these 2 flowers here of the previous row, and you're going to put a flower in there. And again, you continue this pattern right the way to the end, and then we will go on to row 4, which is our final row of increasing. So I've just completed my last flower of that in between round, between them 2, and I am just going to slip stitch to the end. And into the last stitch, chain 1 and turn your work. So for this row, which is row 4, if you're not counting the flower rows, it's row 4, into back loops only, put 2 double crochet into the first stitch, and 1 double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Not hard to do. 1, 2, and 3. 2 double crochet in the next stitch, and 1 double crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. And 3. And repeat this right the way until you come to the end of the row. That is the end of that row. So you'll start to see now that your cardigan is starting to form a circular shape. We're going to do one more row before we start shaping the arms, and we're going to do one more in between row and then one more double crochet row. So like every other row, chain 1 and turn your work, and into the front loop you're going to do your slip stitching and your flower. So you are going to slip stitch right along to the middle of these 2 flowers and do a flower here and here and here and so on until you come to the end of the row. We have now come to the end of our fourth row, our fourth in between row, and we're going to move on to row 5. So you will chain 1, turn your work. So there's no increasing in this round, in this row, so you're just going to do 1 double crochet into the back loop of every stitch across. So 1 double crochet into the first stitch. Sometimes they can be hard to find, but they are there. There we go. So 1, 2, and so on right across until you get to the end, and then we will be doing our last in between row of flowers, and then we will continue with the rest of the cardigan. So I will meet you at the end of this row. I've come to my last stitch of this round. Hard to get into. Last stitch. I'm going to chain 1 and turn, and it is now on to, we have done 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of flowers, and now it is time to do one more row in between of flowers, and I'll show you how to flatten the flowers down so they look a lot neater, because you know they're very all over the place. So you just go ahead and do your flower in between. I'm going to start off this row by slip stitching into the first 3 stitches. 1, 2, and 3, and doing my first flower and continuing on from there with a flower in between the 2 flowers of the previous in between row, and then we are going to shape the arms.